Hi, I'm Brian Mosley with SEMrush, and today I'm going to take you through the SplitSignal demo deck. We're going to cover why SEO testing is important, is statistical SEO testing right for you, how to test with SplitSignal. We'll show you some examples of SEO split tests and their results, as well as how to set up an SEO test using SplitSignal. When people say A/B testing, they can mean a lot of different things. Historically, A/B testing is referred to when talking about CRO-based testing, or testing for the user experience. We're not going to talk about this today because there's already a lot of great tools out there which help with user experience-based testing. Optimizely, A/B Tasty, and Google Optimize, to name a few. In regards to SEO testing, it's a broad term which can mean a lot of different things. Typically, when people talk about SEO testing, they're referring to single-page testing. The analysis that you can use for a single-page SEO test is pre and post. So you take a screenshot of your Google Analytics in January, you make a change, you wait 6 months, and you see what happened. There are a lot of problems with this type of testing that we're not going to go into, but essentially, experts agree that cohort testing is the way to get the best, most accurate, confident results. Now, in a cohort test, we're referring to the types of templatized pages that we're running the test on. For example, product pages, category pages, blog pages, marketplace pages, and directory or location pages or near me pages are great examples of templatized pages that you can run a statistical SEO split test on. Underneath cohort testing, there are two different ways to analyze the results. Again, pre and post, where you take a screenshot, wait, and then check it again, kind of like a dipstick of a car. Or statistical SEO testing, where you use a Bayesian statistical model, more specifically Google's causal impact model, to ensure that your results are statistically significant. So underneath cohort testing and statistical analysis, you can either use a server-side implementation or a client-side implementation. Today, we're going to be talking about cohort testing using statistical significance and client-side rendering. If you're hoping to learn more about that type of testing, you're in the right place. Let's talk about why SEO testing is important for those who are not sure how to potentially pitch this to their bosses. In its simplest forms, the best way to achieve website growth is through innovation, and the only way to innovate is through rapid experimentation. Historically, experimenting through technical SEO has been a real challenge for enterprise SEOs. The basic methodology for how to grow your website is to test, validate, and go live with these changes. SplitSignal will help you test potential SEO changes so you can learn and confirm what your dev team needs to prioritize. Once your dev team has prioritized these changes, you then push them to a Jira ticket, and your dev will implement these changes. SEMrush has completed the development of our SplitSignal tool, and we're now working on a tool that will help SEOs bypass the dev team and implement these changes. We're tentatively calling this tool SplitSignal Live, and we're accepting beta testers now. If you're interested in joining our beta, email splitsignal@semrush.com. To show you that you haven't missed the mark yet, statistical SEO split testing is still in the very, very early stages. I equate it to where conversion rate optimization was back in 2012. In 2012, the job title of CRO Testing Manager didn't exist. Only large brands like Amazon and Pinterest and eBay had the abilities to do conversion rate optimization back in 2012. Fast forward 7 years later, now almost every major website has a CRO team and a CRO tool. My prediction is you're going to see a similar adoption curve for SEO split testing tools and teams as you did with conversion rate optimization teams back in 2012. Don't take our word for it. Jeff Bezos has mentioned that the key to Amazon's success has been in their level of ability to innovate. Kevin Indig with Shopify has mentioned that SEOs need to ditch the SEO checklist and start testing. And Rand Fishkin has mentioned that this type of statistical testing is moving from cutting edge to best practice. To further illustrate the difference between statistical SEO testing and CRO or UX testing, let's walk through an example. So for CRO testing, an example might be changing a button color. There's plenty of tools I can already use, and we're only testing one page, and our stakeholder is the user, and the goal is increasing conversions. Whereas SEO testing, we're maybe changing the heading titles, we're maybe injecting content, changing content, or moving around title and meta tags. There are plenty of tools we can use. There are only a few tools we can use for this, and we're not testing this on one page, but a cohort or a group of templatized pages. Our stakeholder is Googlebot, and the goal is to increase organic clicks. So the simple example I use is that of a grocery store. If you own the grocery store, you might put the milk and eggs in the back to encourage people to walk through the store to decrease their bounce rate and increase time on site. You also might move the gum to the front of the store near the checkout. This is going to help increase the average order value. All of these things are done once the user is already on the site or once the customer is already in the store. SEO testing is different. SEO testing involves moving the sidewalks and installing a valet station and changing the traffic lights outside in order to drive more people to line up in front of my store. That analogy is simple enough to use to explain to any CRO teams or any C-level on the difference between statistical SEO testing and existing CRO testing. Why invest in an SEO testing program? There are four main reasons. 1, do no harm, or SEO insurance. 2, find gold. 3, save dev dollars. And 4, prove ROI of SEO. So for number 1, do no harm, this is a really important reason to make sure you're testing things before pushing to prod. We spend so much time as SEOs scratching and clawing to try to get to the top of Google, and we work so hard for our traffic gains that we want to make sure when we launch new code or push new initiatives to dev, we're not breaking anything. Now, when we talk about the ROI of testing, do no harm or SEO insurance makes a lot of sense. For example, if you buy a car and you buy car insurance and you never get into an accident, the ROI on that car insurance is very, very poor. However, if you get into one accident and there are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage and medical bills, then that car insurance payment is the best ROI you've ever spent. Your website acts in the same way. Unless you're testing things, you have no way to know what's actually going to potentially harm your site. Chances are you're not going to harm anything. But why take the risk when you have an insurance policy that you can buy in place? Second reason for SEO testing is to find gold. There are plenty of things that you can test, and there are plenty of ways that you can learn from the different tests that you're running. So whether a test is positive, negative, or no change, you can always be learning, and those learnings can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. Number 3, save dev dollars. Most SEOs tell me that they push between 10 and 20 changes to dev per month or per quarter. They also tell me that half of those changes that they push to dev aren't going to do anything to help SEO. However, they don't know which half. So what if there was a world where you never again pushed a change to prod that wasn't going to significantly impact SEO? For most enterprise brands, that could lead to $10,000 to $20,000 per month in saved dev dollars. And finally, and most importantly, proving the ROI of SEO. A lot of SEOs spend time on things that aren't super fun or interesting for them. They would ideally like to hire an intern or an analyst who can help take some of those lower impact tasks off of their plate. Examples are updating titles and updating metas. However, it's tough to allocate new budget for additional SEO headcount because it's really, really hard to specifically prove the ROI of SEO. The email team can do it, the paid search and social teams can do it, and your CRO teams can do it, but SEO teams really struggle to prove ROI. With SEO testing, you can isolate changes and you can attribute a very specific amount of additional sessions or clicks to individual changes. You no longer need to guess. With that superpower, you can now even the playing field between budget allocation with your CMO and start to hire more people, grow your division so that you can spend time on more strategic initiatives. Next, let's talk about if statistical SEO testing is right for you. The way to identify whether you're a good fit for SEO testing is to ask yourself, do I have tens of thousands of templatized pages? Templatized pages can include product pages, category pages, directory pages, marketplace pages, review pages, and stock photo pages. In general, our suggestion for running a statistically significant SEO test requires 300 templatized pages per test group and 30 to 100,000 clicks per test group per month. You can see some examples of good fit websites for SEO testing here. SEO testing is not easy. Similar to CRO testing, there's about a 20 to 50% win rate with SEO tests, depending on who's running the test. If you choose very, very simple low-risk tests, there's a higher probability that you're going to get a no change result. But if you're choosing more risky, more advanced tests, there's a higher probability you'll get a positive result. Ideally, with SEO testing, our goal is not just to find the gold. Our goal is to balance our expectations between learnings and outcomes. Here, we'll talk about how to test with SplitSignal. The page and click requirements per test group are about 300 templatized pages and about 30,000 monthly organic clicks. In order to run a test with SplitSignal, you need to, number one, have a SEMrush account. Number two, have the ability to connect Google Search Console. Number three, have the ability to install a small JavaScript snippet via Google Tag Manager. Now, let's talk about the process for running a statistical SEO split test. First, we need to research and split the pages in our test group between the variant and the control. Ideally, you would ask your data science team to build you an algorithm that would select the appropriate URLs and split pages equitably. It's really, really important in order to account for seasonality and other external factors that your control group and your variant group have the exact same amount of traffic over the last 100 days. Next, we need to beg our developers to make the variant change. Developer resources are required to change the template and then change it back when the test is finished. This is really hard for a lot of teams because dev resources are so limited. Third, we actually need to launch the test and measure it. Usually this involves asking a business intelligence team to set up some sort of tracking dashboard in Google, Data Studio, or Tableau. And fourth, and finally, we need to analyze the results. This is the big difference between a pre and post test and a statistical test. In a pre and post test, there is no analysis. In CRO testing, this is very easy. We don't need to use a statistical model when we're measuring our user. It's very easy to say what made a difference. Was it the green button or the blue button that got the most clicks? But in statistical SEO testing, it's completely different. Ideally, we would be using a data science team or build an in-house tool, using a Bayesian statistical model called causal impact that Google built to analyze and ensure statistically significant results of our test. The analogy I like to use here is when you're measuring your own weight, a bathroom scale works just fine. However, if you're trying to measure 3 grains of salt, you could never use a bathroom scale. When you're trying to analyze slight vibrations from Google, it's really important that we're using the right tool, and the right tool in this case is Google's causal impact statistical model. Researching and splitting your pages, asking your developers to make the change for the variant group, launching your tests, tracking it, and analyzing the results with a statistical model is really, really tough. And this is why even the most advanced SEOs are not able to run a lot of SEO tests over the course of a year. And that's why we built SplitSignal. SplitSignal, we research and split your pages for you. We make the variant pages for you by bypassing your dev team. We launch the test for you, and our built-in causal impact model analyzes the results so you don't need to get your data science team involved. Now, let's walk through some example SEO tests and their results. This is a very simple title tag test that we ran on a large native e-commerce site that has over 22 million organic clicks. Back in 2020, this site saw an increase in traffic when they changed the title tag to add the year and the phrase "comforter sets you'll love" in the title. After COVID, they wanted to make sure that the lift that they saw was actually because of the title tag change and not just due to external factors. So they removed the year and the phrase from their title tags, and they wanted to test the results. What they saw was pretty impressive. They saw a 6% lift in organic traffic to those category pages. What you're seeing here are 2 real screenshots from just some of the reports that you can pull in SplitSignal, showing the data science view of the control and the variant group. Here it's very clear to see that the variant group outperformed the control group over a time span of 28 days. Next, let's talk through a meta description test for a smaller native e-commerce retailer that has 2.5 million sessions per month. They wanted to test if adding a call to action or a phrase in the meta description would increase traffic. What's interesting to me about this test was not the test itself, but how they came up with the test. They went to their paid social team and they asked them which phrases were really resonating with their audience. And the social team mentioned that whenever they talked about new styles being added, they saw a lift in those campaigns. It worked for their users. They wanted to make sure it also worked with Googlebot. And it did. They saw a 21% increase in organic traffic to their category pages from running this test. You can also read more about this test in a case study that we have on the SEMrush blog. And finally, we'll talk through a header change test on a stock photo site that had under 1 million in organic traffic. Here, the SEO team wanted to determine exactly how important headers were. They had these user-generated content pages, and they wanted to see if an H1 or an H2 was going to work better. When they ran the test, they saw almost a 5% lift in organic traffic to those pages simply by changing the header. They were able to use this information to convince their dev team to prioritize the change. Now, let's talk about how to set up an SEO test in SplitSignal. First, we create the test name and define a test hypothesis. We'll use a very simple example of adding free shipping to the end of the title tag. Next, we dig into our folders and subfolders using Google Search Console data and pull out the amount of clicks and URLs from the individual folders. In this example, we're going to be running a category test on home and garden and clothing and shoes category pages. The next step is to filter to make sure we're getting the right URLs. You can do this 2 ways, by manually uploading a list of URLs or using the filtering system within SplitSignal. Once we have our test group, we're now going to define our rules. The options are title tag change, meta tag change, heading change, moving an element, removing an element, or adding an element. For our title tag change, it's pretty simple. You can inject content before, in the middle, or after your title tag. Same as with the meta description. With the heading change, we'll simply change an H2 to an H1, or an H1 to an H3, or whatever variation throughout. For a move element test, you can get really creative. You can move the reviews above or below the fold. You can move an image. You can move any element on the page. For these tests, you are going to have to most likely get your CRO team involved, as they're interested in any layout shift. But keep in mind, we're only running tests on a very small amount of pages, like 100 or 150 pages. So the disruption for your users shouldn't be that intense. Also, we're only running these tests for about 14 to 21 days. So that's a very small price to pay for the learnings of how Googlebot will interpret moving elements around our page. And finally, a remove or a delete element test. In this example, we removed one of the breadcrumbs of categories from the breadcrumbs. And we actually saw a positive result with this test as well. We've also seen people remove social sharing icons, remove header images, remove different bits of text. We can also do a find and replace test where you can actually upload variables and change content to see if new content makes a difference with SERP results. To recap, we've defined our hypothesis, we've named our test, we've filtered our pages, and we've chosen our test type. Now it's time to create the rule. We're going to complete the test type setup by choosing the test type and then previewing the result. So here's our example where we are pulling in the title tag from the CSS selector. We are adding the phrase free shipping to the end of it, and we're able to preview the control and the variant. Once you have your test set up, you can review the duration. We recommend anywhere between 14 and 21 days. You can preview a couple of the pages that are set to be tested. You can validate what will be tested. And if everything looks good, you press launch. Once you press launch, you'll be able to preview and copy a list of all the URLs in the variant and the control group. It's best practice to send these to your data science team to ensure that they're able to watch and monitor those pages to ensure that no other CRO or UX tests are happening on those pages for the 14 days of the test. You can also preview how many of those pages have been visited by Googlebot to ensure a statistically significant result. Once you press launch, a few different things will happen. First, SplitSignal will go back and collect the last 100 days of historical data for your test group. Next, SplitSignal will analyze that data and exclude pages based on whether they're outliers, redirects, non-existent pages, and make sure that the test group pages are the best for testing. Then SplitSignal will take that information and split your pages into the control and variant group without using a data science team. Finally, SplitSignal will use Google Tag Manager to apply the changes to the variant group and start the test. This usually takes about 30 minutes after the launch of the test.